The shadow of the defeat hung over the Texan camp that April night 1836. Exhausted men slept restlessly, dreaming of the horrors witnessed in Alamo and Goliad. Meanwhile, his general walked alone on the banks of the swamp, carrying the weight of the expectations of a nascent nation. What happened in the following hours would turn Sam Houston from a commander withdrawn and the architect of Texan independence. But the miraculous victory in San Jacinto had a hidden price, a supernatural cost that would haunt the great general for his years left. This is the story that has never been told in the official books. A narrative where heroism finds the inexplicable, where pacts sealed in the shadows of bayou shape the fate of an entire nation. A recovered story of sealed diaries, hidden letters, and testimonies from those who saw the great Sam Houston, an American hero, shake before visitors that no one else could see. Get ready to find out the dark side of American glory. The San Jacinto Pact. Of Sam Houston's private memories, recovered in 1967. It is with a trembling hand that finally records these events. For decades I kept this secret, allowing historians and biographers to celebrate victory in San Jacinto as the exclusive fruit of military strategy and the courage of my men. But while death approaches, I feel the need to confess the truth, even if these pages never go public. There is a relief in finally admitting what happened that night of April 20th, 1836, and the price I have paid since. After weeks of strategic withdrawal that many confused with cowardice, my army ended near the confluence of the San Jacinto River with Buffalo Bayou. We were exhausted, demoralized, and less. St. Anna chased us with more than 1,400 experienced soldiers, and we all knew the horrors he had inflicted in Alamo and Goliad. The pressure on my shoulders was unbearable. The future of an entire republic depended on the decisions I made in the following hours. Unable to sleep, I left my tent around midnight and walked to the edge of bayou, away from the eyes of my officers. The moon was almost full, illuminating the swamp with a ghostly light that transformed the cypresses into silhouettes of silent sentinels. Night sounds, frogs, insects, and occasional splash in dark waters were my only companions. It was then that I noticed the silence. Not a gradual silence, but a sudden absence of all sound, as if nature itself had arrested breathing. The air became dense, almost breathable, and I felt a presence even before seeing it. "General Houston," said a soft, firm voice behind me. I turned quickly, hand instinctively looking for my pistol. There, where I'm sure there was no one seconds before, there was a hooded figure. It was not tall, in fact, it had a modest stature, but there was something in his presence that suggested immense power contained in human form. "Who are you?" I demanded, keeping the composure despite the chill that roamed my spine. "How did you go through my sentries?" The figure did not respond immediately. Instead, he made a wide gesture with his hand toward bayou. The waters began to stir, although there was no wind, and on the surface there were images that I recognized as the battlefield that had inspected earlier that day. "Tomorrow," finally said the figure, "you will face your decisive time. St. Anna will come in full force, and your men will be massacred just like the men of Alamo." I swallowed hard, recognizing my own verbalized fears by this stranger. "You don't know that," I contested, but without conviction. "I know this and more, Samuel," he said, using my baptism name with a disturbing familiarity. "I know the weight it carries. The republic that was born in Washington on the Brazos will die here if you fail." "What do you want?" I asked, alarmed with the accuracy of your words. "Are you a Mexican spy?" The figure issued a sound that could be a laugh, though totally devoid of joy. "I do not serve nations, General. I belong to this place. I was here long before the Mexicans, the Spanish, or even the tribes you admire so much. And I'll be here much after all this is forgotten." As he spoke, the hood slipped slightly, and for a moment I glimpsed what was underneath. It was not a human face, at least not entirely. I saw characteristics that seemed fluid, as if they could not decide between man and animal, between old and young. I looked away instinctively. "I came to offer you what you want most, General. Victory. Not just a victory, but such a complete triumph that your name will be remembered as long as Texas exists." At what price? I asked, because even in my despair, the years between the Cherokee had taught me that forces like this always require payment. Something small, answered the figure. Something you will not even miss until it is time to pay. And when is it? Years here. When glory has already been your time enough to taste your taste. I remained silent, considering his words. All my being screamed to refuse, to turn his back and return to the camp. But then I thought of men under my command, the families running away to the east in panic, the young republic that had taken their first hesitating steps only 6 weeks earlier. What is your answer, General? Insisted the figure. The dawn approaches, and with him, his destiny. What exactly are you offering? Tomorrow, when the battle begins, a mist will come down over the field. Your men will see through it with perfect clarity, while the Mexicans will be confused and slow. Santa Anna himself will be affected, making decisions that challenge military sense. The victory will be yours in minutes, not hours. All this happened exactly as expected, I must add. And in return? The figure stretched a pale hand under the cloak. Just a handshake to seal our agreement. The exact price. You'll know when the time comes to pay. I looked at that extended hand. It was not completely human, the fingers were too long, the sharp nails like claws. Still, thinking of everything at stake, I extended my own hand. The moment our fingers touched, I felt a launching pain up my arm to my heart. I fell to my knees, unable to breathe for a few eternal seconds. When I finally recovered my breath and looked up, the figure was gone. Swamp sounds gradually returned to the frog's croaker, the tinnitus of the insects, the movement of the water. I examined my hand in the moonlight and saw a dark mark in the palm, like a recent burn in the form of a 5-pointed star. However, upon returning to the camp, I found that the brand had completely disappeared. I convinced myself, during the following hours, that I had dreamed awake a product of stress and exhaustion. But the next morning, as we prepare our battle lines, the mist arrived exactly as promised. What followed is known history. We attack at 4 in the afternoon, while the Mexican army rested. In 18 minutes, the battle was determined. We capture Santa Anna himself the next day, ensuring Texas's independence. I became a hero, as the figure had promised. In the following months, the brand briefly reappeared in my hand on 3 different occasions, just to fade again before someone could notice it. Gradually, I convinced myself that the strange experience in San Jacinto's Eve had been a hallucination, a curious case of coincidence combined with the tension of the moment. For 3 years, there were no more signs of the figure or pact we made. Then it started. I had been elected the first president of the Republic of Texas and was working late at my office in Houston, the city that had received my name. It was the eve of the 3rd anniversary of the Battle of San Jacinto. The brand reappeared in my hand, darker and more defined than ever. As she watched her with growing apprehension, I heard a knock on the door. My assistant had already left for the night, and I didn't expect visits. "Bed in," he said, instinctively hiding his hand marked under some documents. The door opened, but there was no one there. Or rather, there was no one I could see initially. So a dark shape slid inside. It was not Bayou's hooded figure, but something smaller, more animal. It looked like a coyote except that his eyes shone with an unnatural yellow light, and his hair was so dark that it seemed to absorb the lamplight in my office. "It's time to start paying your debt, Samuel Houston," said the animal, his voice surprisingly similar to that of the hooded figure. I got up abruptly, knocking down my chair. "What do you want from me?" "For now, just a small favor. There's a decision you will make tomorrow about the location of the new capital. You will choose Waterloo, on the Colorado River." Waterloo was just one of the places we were considering, and it was not my favorite choice. "Why? What's in Waterloo?" "The place is on an old sacred territory. My brothers and I are interested in seeing human settlements built there. This disturbs certain barriers." Barriers. The word was said with a peculiar emphasis that caused me another chill. "What if I refuse?" The animal tilted his head, his yellow eyes fixed on mine. "You made a pact, General. The price is not negotiable." Before I could answer, the animal backed down to the shadows and disappeared. The next day, against my best trial, I recommended Waterloo, later renamed Austin, as the new capital of Texas. This was only the first of many favors required over the years. Some seemed inconsequential, placing a certain person in a smaller position, visiting a specific location on a specific date. Others were more substantial and more disturbing. The visitors were never the same. Sometimes it was the yellow-eyed coyote, sometimes an abnormally large owl, occasionally a human figure with slightly distorted characteristics. Once it was a pale child with totally black eyes that I found alone on a trail while traveling. They all knew my name, all mentioned the pact, and all demanded something from me. In 1841, one of these visitors demanded that I opposed a military expedition to Santa Fe, something I was already inclined to do for practical reasons. But the visitor, this time an indigenous elder whose feet did not touch the floor as she floated in my office, insisted that the expedition should go on, but I should ensure it was poorly equipped. "They must fail," she said, "but some must return to tell the story." I resisted this particular requirement, just to find that the brand in my hand burned like iron on the next nights, preventing me from sleeping until I gave in. The expedition departed, poorly prepared as instructed, and ended in disaster. Many Texans were captured by the Mexicans, and some died in the forced march to Mexico City. With every favor that granted, the guilt grew within me. I started drinking heavily, first to sleep without nightmares, then simply to support the weight of my actions. My first wife left me, unable to understand the changes in my behavior. In 1846, a decade after San Jacinto, Texas was attached to the United States. I thought this might free me from the pact, that the powers I had negotiated may be limited to the borders of the Republic of Texas. It was wrong. Visitors continued to come, now requiring favors related to my position as a Senator of the United States. Once, during a crucial debate on the 1850 commitment, one of the visitors, a tall and thin man with abnormally long fingers who sat in the Senate gallery directly on my field of vision, signaled to support a specific clause that would have expanded slave territories. This time I refused firmly. The principles I had defended all my life could not be committed, not even to satisfy the pact. The consequences were immediate and terrible. That night I woke up with the feeling that I was not alone in my room. Sitting on the edge of my bed was the original hooded figure, just as it had appeared on the bank of the bayou 14 years earlier. "You challenge our terms," said the figure, his colder voice than I remembered. "There are boundaries even to debts like mine," I answered, surprising myself with my courage. "I will not sell my whole soul, not even for the victory that granted me." The figure remained silent for a long moment. "Then we will pay otherwise." The next morning I received news that my eldest son had suddenly died at home. The doctors called brain fever, but I knew the truth. It was the alternative payment that the figure had mentioned. In the following years, I learned to balance the requirements of the pact with what was left of my conscience. I accepted the favors that seemed innocuous or aligned with my own principles. He resisted those who could not stand, knowing that there would be consequences, but willing to pay them instead of corrupting me completely. Visitors seemed to respect, or perhaps just tolerate, this new arrangement. They came less frequently as they aged, although they never completely disappeared. In 1861, when the Civil War began, I received the most disturbing visit of all. It was not the hooded figure, nor the coyote, nor any of the ways I had found before. He was a Confederate soldier, except that his uniform was soaked with parental water, and through the fabric he could see wounds that no living man could bear. "It's time for the last payment, Sam Houston," said the soldier, bayou water dripping from his mouth as he spoke. "What is the final price?" I asked, resigned after decades of partial servitude. "Texas should join the Confederation," he said. "You, as a governor, should support secession." This was something I couldn't do. I had fought alongside Andrew Jackson, dedicated my life to the Union. Texas I had helped create was intended to be part of the United States, not to separate in the first crisis. "I can't," I answered firmly. "I won't." The dead soldier tilted his head, studying with opaque eyes. Then you choose to break our pact. If necessary, yes. The price will be all you built. Your reputation. Your legacy. Texas himself. So let it be, I answered. The next morning, the Texas State Convention voted for secession. As a governor, I refused to swear loyalty to the Confederation and was deposed. At 67, after a life dedicated to Texas, I was expelled from office and sent back to obscurity. As I write these final words, I am on my deathbed. The visits ceased after my deposition, as if the pact had finally been dissolved by my final refusal. But the brand has returned to my permanent hand now, darkening as my life fades. I don't know what will happen when I cross to the other side. I fear that the forces I have negotiated for so many years have been waiting to charge an even higher price in the next life. Or perhaps, having taken almost everything in this life, consider the debt settled. I leave this account as a warning to those who, in times of despair, can consider similar pacts. The victory in San Jacinto guaranteed Texas's freedom, this is true. But at what cost to my own soul, only me and the entities I negotiated we can completely know. Samuel Houston, Huntsville, Texas, July 1863. Consequences of the Pact. By Dr. Eleanor Wilkes, historian and researcher of the supernatural, 2018. As a historian specializing in the intersection between documented historical events and paranormal phenomena, I spent the last decade investigating the document known as Houston's Confessions, the above transcribed memories, supposedly written by Sam Houston himself before his death. The manuscript was discovered in 1967 during the renewal of his last residence in Huntsville, carefully hidden inside a cavity on the wall of his office. Conventional historians discarded the document as an elaborate forgery or, at best, the feverish delirium of a great man in the final stages of a difficult life. My research, however, suggests a different perspective. First, calligraphic analyses confirm with 97% sure that the document was written by Houston's hand. Paper, paint and conservation methods are consistent with period practices. More intriguing is the correlation between the favors mentioned in the manuscript and real decisions made by Houston who disconcerted historians for generations. Waterloo's recommendation, present-day Austin, as Texas's permanent capital, for example, was surprising at the time, as Houston had previously favored a location closer to the coast. The mischievous expedition to Santa Fe in 1841 remains one of the greatest strategic misconceptions of his career, inconsistent with his usual solid military judgment. And his firm opposition to the secession of Texas, which cost his position as governor, has always been attributed exclusively to his loyalty to Andrew Jackson and the Union, but the manuscript suggests an additional dimension of personal resistance against forces that had controlled aspects of his life for decades. There are also corroborative evidence in other sources. The diary of his second wife, Margaret Leah Houston, contains several references to strange visitors who were never introduced to her and night visits to Houston's office that made her disturbed. In a particularly worrying entrance of 1851, she wrote, "Again Samuel was locked in the office with that strange creature. He thinks I don't know these visits, but how could he ignore the swamp odors and decomposition that remains after his departure? Or the murmurs in tongues that no Christian should understand all night through my husband's soul, fearing that some disease of mind has possessed him." Contemporary reports of officers who served with Houston and San Jacinto mention the unusual mist that descended on the battlefield, just as described in the manuscript. Lieutenant James Sylvester, who participated in the capture of Santa Ana, wrote in his memories of a strange distortion in the vision during battle, where Texan soldiers seemed to see perfectly as the Mexicans stumbled as blind men. Especially revealing is a recent archaeological study of the area around San Jacinto Battleground State Historic Site. Excavations made in 2012 revealed indigenous artifacts that suggest that the place was used for tribal rituals long before the arrival of Europeans. More remarkable, however, it was the stone-recorded patterns found precisely where Houston described his meeting with the hooded figure, standards that include the same five-pointed star he said was temporarily marked in his hand. Finally, there's the issue of paranormal anomalies documented over the years in places associated with Houston. Employees and visitors of the San Jacinto Museum and Memorial reported sightings of a tall man in 19th-century clothes, often accompanied by a large, dark dog with bright eyes, descriptions that correspond distantly to Houston and the coyote mentioned in his manuscript. Houston's mansion in Huntsville, now a historical place, is known for inexplicable activities, particularly in the old office where the manuscript was found. Night guards reported whispers in an unidentified language and occasionally the smell of swamp-stagnant water, even in the drier months of summer. As a historian with obligations to documentable truth, I cannot categorically state that the pact described by Houston was real in the conventional sense. But as a researcher who spent years investigating the spaces where history finds the inexplicable, I must conclude that something extraordinary occurred on the eve of the Battle of San Jacinto, something that haunted one of the greatest American leaders for the rest of their days and that perhaps still echoes where their history was written. A night visit to the battlefield. Personal report of Carlos Martinez, guard of the Historical Park of San Jacinto, 2023. I work as a night guard in the State Historical Park of the San Jacinto battlefield for almost 7 years. Most of the time it is quiet, occasional tourists get to the sunset, so I make my rounds, check the locks and guarantee that no one is illegally camping on the property. The story I'm about to share happened on the night of April 20th, 2022, the eve of the battle anniversary. I was doing my usual round when I noticed something unusual nearby, a weak shine that seemed to float over the water. I initially thought they were night fishermen with lanterns, so I approached to investigate. The night was silent than usual. No insects, no night bird, not even the constant noise of distant traffic on the highway. Only absolute silence as I walked towards the water bank. The shine disappeared before I could approach enough to identify it. I was about to return to my route when I heard voices talking in low tones. It seemed to come from a wooded area near the margin. "Hello?" I called, illuminating the area with my flashlight. "The park is closed. I need to ask you to withdraw." No one answered, but the voices didn't stop. I approached more and realized something strange. Although I could clearly hear the words, I couldn't understand them. It was not Spanish, nor any other language I recognized. There was an irregular rhythm in speech, almost like a corner. When I arrived at the clearing, there was no one. The voices had ceased, but now I smelled a strong mud and decaying vegetation, much more intense than Bayou's usual odor. It was then that I saw the man. He was standing on the edge of the water, with his back to me, wearing what seemed to be an ancient military uniform. It was tall, with wide shoulders, and had a hat of wide tabs that I recognized from historical portraits. "Lord," I called. "It is not allowed to use historical fantasies in the park after closing time." He turned slowly, and felt my blood freezing. The face was exactly like Sam Houston's portraits that he saw hundreds of times, except his eyes. His eyes seemed completely black in the light of my flashlight. "It didn't happen as they tell," he said, his deep and clear voice, despite the distance between us. "The victory was not ours. It was bought." I backed away. I stumbled into an exposed root and fell. When I got up seconds later, the man was gone. I ran back to the visitors center and passed the rest of the shift inside, convincing me that I had imagined everything. The next morning, however, I decided to check the area in daylight. On the bank of Bayou, exactly where the man had been, I found a single old coin. It was a silver coin of 1836, the year of the battle, with a strange brand carved on the surface, a 5-pointed star. I handed the currency to the curator of the museum, which was intrigued but not surprised. Apparently similar artifacts have been found in the same area over the years, always near the battle anniversary. And always with the same brand. Since then, I redoubled my vigilance during my night rounds, especially close to Bayou. I never saw the man who looked like Houston again, but occasionally, when the night is especially silent, I can hear those whispers again and smell the ancient swamp. The story that teaches us about Sam Houston and the Battle of San Jacinto is undisputed American heroism. But spending enough time on that field at night makes you wonder how much of our story was written not made of bravery, but for pacts made in the shadows, whose terms we continue to pay to this day. If you like this sinister story about the hidden secrets of American history, be sure to enjoy this video, share it with friends who enjoy good supernatural stories, and subscribe to the channel. Each week, we bring new narratives that explore the darkest side of the American past and the mysteries that official history tries to hide. Leave in the comments which other historical figures you would like to see in our next stories, and what dark secrets they may have hidden from history books. Until next time, and remember, some wins have a price that continues to be paid long after the battle is over.